The Health Fix podcast teaches you how to take charge of your health naturally by giving you the information you need to elevate your health.
Hello there, health junkies. Welcome to another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Krause. Today's episode, I'm interviewing Dana Monsees. We're going to be talking about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart here, body image, dieting, and the quest to always be losing weight. This has been my life for probably the last 30 plus years, and Dana and I are going to shed some light on that topic today. So I'm looking into diving in and talking with Dana. But let me first tell you a little bit about her. She is a board certified nutritionist, a licensed dietitian nutritionist. She's a body image coach and the host of Real Talk with Dana, where she's teaching women to really fix their relationship with their body and their food, one delicious meal at a time. So, Dana, welcome to the Health Fix. Hey, health junkies. I've got Dana on the line here, and we are going to be talking about something so near and dear to my heart. It's body image. And we're going to talk about how this culture of chronic dieting and trying to get to this body weight that, this imaginary body weight that, or body size or shape that you have stuck in your head. We're going to talk about how that trashes your gut. And it trashes your adrenals, so it fatigues you, and how it just can reap havoc on your body. And we're going to be diving into all that. We're going to talk a little bit about some personal stories with Dana and I and things of that nature. So Dana, welcome to the Health Fix.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really pumped to be here because I love talking about this stuff. So wherever you want to go, I am game.
Oh, goodness. Well, here's what I found out, folks. I found out that Dana and I have a lot in common. In particular, we both have a thing for Olympic weightlifting. And then there's the hiking, and then there's the skiing. And then what blew my mind is she was like, oh, I was a competitive swimmer for over 16 years. I'm like, oh, me too. And I thought about it a little bit, and I was like, oh, you know what? I think that's where it all kind of started for me in terms of the body image, and where I started to just really realize I might be a little chubbier than some of these other people. And I started to pinch, and be like, oh, I can pinch an inch. And then it just turned into this whole crazy thing about me and my body in my swimsuit and the freaking size of my swimsuit, which I don't know. It just went downward. So Dana, does that sound familiar to you? Am I just a freak in nature, or am I thinking I'm pretty similar to a lot of folks?
You are extremely spot on. So to give the listeners a little bit of a background, so I'm a dietitian, nutritionist, body image coach. I swam my whole life through college. And since, it's been 10, 11 years at this point, maybe 12 years at this point. I've also been swim coaching as a kind of side thing that I used to only do in the summers. So I live in Maryland, right outside of DC, and our county, our system of Maryland swimming is where Katie Ledecky came from, and Michael Phelps and Katie Hoff and all of those people, right? So swimming is big here. So I grew up in that. And then I also started coaching at club, summer, all of the things. So it was bad when we were growing up, in the sense that it's always bad mentally to be in a body conscious sport as a young girl, especially, but also young boys too also deal with this, for we see very different kind of reasons for that. But really with young girls is what I obviously personally experienced as growing up, as a girl. And then now what I see is it's been made even worse with the advent of social media, because no longer are you just going to the pool to see all of your friends and, people. This sounds kind of gross to people who aren't swimmers, but sometimes if you forget a suit, you borrow a suit from somebody else, right? Is it the most sanitary thing? No, but it happens, right? Or, when you're shopping for a big suit, is what we call them, for a competitive meet, right? If you think about the swimsuits that you see people wearing in the Olympics are very different from the suits that you'll see people just training on a day-to-day basis in the pool. Those suits are so tight that it can take 30 to 45 minutes to get into a suit if you're lucky, right? So they want the suits to be as tight as possible so you can be as hydrodynamic as possible, right? So sizing with that is also a really huge issue. So that now we're getting to the point of you're not only dealing with that and the in-person stuff, but you're also dealing with the media. And like, I am just so glad that I'm not a teenager or in my early 20s or anything during this time where Instagram and TikTok and everything are so popular, because the comparison game and like comparisonitis and perfectionism, they're like reaching new heights basically. But to your point of, does a lot of body image stuff start very young in body conscious sports like track and swimming and gymnastics are like the three big ones. And then obviously things like dance and ballet and figure skating and stuff like that. But in my own experience, swimming was a big one. And then having competed in Olympic weightlifting too, that can also be a very disordered place because you compete in weight classes, right? And so people will have to do all of these crazy protocols to try and fit in a really is not a natural body size for them in order to compete at that level. Because if you're competing as a lighter athlete, but you normally train in the next weight class up, then you're most likely going to be stronger depending on where you are than the people in the lighter weight class. So it's like all of the body conscious sports, I have a lot of experience with them. And then, seeing it from the clinical side of things and seeing it from the body image, disordered eating disorder things is like, I get a lot of people who are either current, I don't want to call them gym rats, but they just really like lifting or they really like going to the gym or whatever, but also either or that they grew up as an athlete. And when you're an athlete, you kind of just go through, especially with things like swimming, you go through your entire life, people telling you, oh, you can eat whatever you want. It doesn't matter because you're just going to burn it off, right? Which is a toxic mentality to begin with. But then as soon as you're not an athlete anymore and you don't have any direction, because typically, like in the US, if you go to like a D1 school or D2, D3, whatever, they're not telling you how to take care of the rest of your life after you're finished being an athlete your senior year. They're telling you how to live your life when you are an athlete. But then as soon as you're done and your season is up, they're like, okay, bye, good luck. And you're like, this has been the structure of my entire life and I don't know how to do this. And that can be a really dangerous place for a lot of people because it's a really easy decision to make to be like, okay, well, I'm clearly not training as much, so I shouldn't be eating as much because again, they tell you you can eat whatever you want. It doesn't matter because you're training it off. Well, if you're not training as much, then clearly I can't just eat, whatever I want. So it can lead to a lot of restrictive patterns. It can lead to a lot of disordered patterns. And then down the line, that can lead to a lot of adrenal issues, hormonal imbalance. It can lead to gut issues. It can lead to mental health issues. It can lead to all of the things.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I see this over and over again, myself included, and it does happen to a lot. I find that this is a big athlete issue in general, and especially for folks who were a seasonal type of athlete or in a lower division school, and then all of a sudden it just like, all right, now what do I do with myself? I didn't compete in college. I had Amy Van Dyken on Colorado State's swim team. I was like, oh hell no. I'm not even going to try. I'm gonna go snowboard, and ski and call it good because, now I don't have to get competitive and I can just hang out myself. But, I think one of the big things that we're looking at with this whole competitive nature and trying to figure out, what do we do is that the body will change when we exercise and the body, has different variations to it. And so then we get confused as to like, what do we do next? So I'm going to shift the topics a little bit here and go into with certain types of restrictions. We can trash the gut. We can also trash the adrenals. And you have a personal story with this. I have a personal story with this because I spent this crazy couple of years of deciding that I was going to eat keto and I was going to run marathons and one after the other. And I was living in the mountains of Colorado and didn't really take into effect the altitude effects on the body and whatnot. And so next thing you know, I'm not having a period anymore. My hormones are all messed up. I am struggling with energy and I still don't have the body that I'd wanted, that I had envisioned since I was 8 years old. And so I think a lot of people have this kind of thought process going on. Will you tell us a little bit about your story and how that kind of played out for you?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that before I go into my story, one thread that's really common to think about here, and you guys can think about this, is there's a lot of research that shows the effect of chronic stress on the body, right? And when we think about the effect of chronic stress on the gut, on the adrenals, on the thyroid, on female menstrual cycles, everything, right? So basically what we're asking you to do here is think about, okay, well, what are the specific stressors that we're talking about? Because in particular, we don't typically think of, unless you're really into this world like me and Janine are, you don't typically think of exercise. You don't typically think of the way that you're eating. You don't typically think of body image in your relationship with food as causing a lot of stress. But what I see with most of my patients is that those kind of trifecta of things are the main stressor that's contributing to these health outcomes. And then obviously a lot of other things kind of snowball into it, right? But so you'll see that in particular in my story. So I grew up as a competitive swimmer. I played, every sport ever. I also grew up in a very athletic family, and I was the only member of that family who was not like stick thin and very fit looking, right? So I don't want to say, that I was an overweight kid, because I have issues with the terms overweight and obese to begin with. But so I was not like a stick thin child. And so then became very self-conscious at a very early age, around I want to say 8 or 9. And then grew up in a house where my mom was dieting all the time and always, talking about her frame and whatever. And then combine that with being in a body conscious sport and being a girl growing up in the world, thankfully with no social media yet. Right. But all of that, and then being fed these messages by women's magazines of, oh, women should be eating 1,200 calories a day, which is the equivalent of what a 3-year-old should be eating, all of this other stuff. And then having, a couple of relationships that weren't the best thing for me, where I had boyfriends tell me oh my God, you'd be so much prettier if you were a little bit skinnier. That really messes with your mind. Yeah, obviously that did not end in a good relationship, but Janine's face excuse me, what? Jaw on the floor. But so then in college, so I swam D3, which was nice because I didn't want to be owned by a D1 school, but at the same time, it was less structure than I was used to. So when you swim in high school competitively and college, it is your entire life. You have practice before school. You go to school, you have practice after school. Good luck if you want to play another sport. I tried doing that for a couple of years and I just could not do it, right? So your whole life is basically governed by school and the sport. You have no time to think about anything else. You don't think about food, whatever, because everything is geared towards performance. So then in college, when we started having, our season was basically between October and March, but you go to school, I went in Vermont, and you go in August and you don't leave until June. So those extra months in there, after my freshman season, I was like, oh my God, what do I do with myself? I had never been a gym goer. I had never done any of that. And all of a sudden I was like, but I need to be working out so that I can eat, right? Otherwise I'm going to gain so much weight and nobody's going to like me, with the conditioning that I'd had from that not so great relationship in high school. But we won't go there. That's a whole nother conversation. But so then that kind of cycle continued. So then in the summers when I was home, I would train with my club team from high school and I would do all these extra workouts. And then I started restricting my food. And then my sophomore year in college, I want to say I started having all of these stomach issues. Now, I think it was some kind of bug or some kind of parasite or something that was playing into these crazy stomach issues that I had. It was partially the restrictive mentality, but basically that got me thinking when all the doctors were like, we can't figure out what's wrong with you, so you should just eat the bananas, rice, applesauce, toast diet. So I was eating that for months and I was losing a ton of weight to the point where I didn't feel good at all. My training was suffering, my time sucked in the pool, and I was like, what is going on? So after that, I started learning about the whole food is medicine thing, which was good in the sense that I was like, oh, you can use food for healing. But then it became very disordered, right? To the point where I developed a weird combination of anorexia and not eating, mostly was bulimic and also had some binge eating, purging, all of the things in there, and was also using exercise as a coping mechanism. If I ever ate what I deemed to be too much, I would exercise it off and then have some, eating disorder things going on there. And that kind of continued after college to the point where when I added those chronic stressors on, so chronic overexercising, chronic undereating, chronic hating my body to the point where I gave myself an eating disorder, right? And disclaimer here, you don't have to have an eating disorder for these things to happen that I'm about to talk about, right? So after that, I went and was working in the field on a political campaign. And if anybody has ever worked doing field work in anything, you barely get any sleep. You're barely able to, have any control of what you're eating. You're drinking a ton of caffeine and you're constantly on call. So that and all of these other stressors basically put my body in like a deep, dark place where I started hearing from this naturopathic doctor that you might have some adrenal issues. We got my cortisol tested and I was like completely bottomed out over everything. And the problem was I did all of the things that she told me to do in terms of the supplements and in terms of the diet and whatever, but I refused to give up the exercise. So I continued to run myself into the ground, trained for a half marathon, had started doing CrossFit on top of that, and pushed myself even further into it. So it wasn't until I was finally like, Dana, you got to cut this shit out. Like, I kind of had like I'm not religious, so I don't want to say come to Jesus moment, but you know what I mean? Is like, I had this like realization that was like, you and your mindset about your relationship with food and your body and exercise is killing you right now. Like you can't continue to do this. At this point, I had multiple more diagnoses so we had adrenal fatigue pretty early into when adrenal fatigue wasn't even on the scene. This is like way back in 2013. And then I had candida, I had leaky gut, I had hypothyroid. I had recently been diagnosed with celiac disease. It was like the trifecta of all of the things. And yet I was still running myself into the ground. So I was finally like, okay, we got to cut this out. And it took me the better part of like through 2-3 years, I want to say, to finally like get my cortisol and DHEA levels out of that hole, to get a regular period back, to not feel like I was going to barf every time I ate, like to get to a place where I was more okay just letting my body do what it wanted to do, not forcing it into a certain size, not forcing it to follow a certain diet, not trying to do 87 different healing protocols at the same time. I had to stop doing CrossFit and Olympic lifting and running and all of the things for a while before I could even think about doing something like yoga again, because I was at a place where I would hit 2:00 in the afternoon and I would just pass out for like an hour. And even when I started doing just gentle yoga again, I would do like a 20-minute yoga class and be like, I need to take a nap. Mm-hmm. Like this is too much. So all this to say is that, aside from an extremely stressful job that I was working on, like I was in my early 20s, I should have been really resilient. I wasn't at that point going out and like drinking all of the time. I wasn't, doing all of the things. I thought what I was doing was taking care of my health, right? I thought I was doing all the right things I was exercising and I was eating #clean and, doing all the things. But that really led to an extremely orthorexic relationship with food, an eating disorder for my body, which caused me to have all of these hormonal imbalances, all of these adrenal issues, all of the gut issues, all of the things, until I finally got those chronic stressors under control, in the sense that I let go of trying to control my body and control the exercise and everything, because I didn't realize until that point that those were the main things that caused me to actually get really sick. It wasn't until that I had a basically like triggering event of going through like a really stressful work period that it pushed me over the edge. But if it had only been the really stressful work period and not all this other stress of perfectionism and people pleasing and all the other stuff that I was doing on top of the work, probably wouldn't have been in that place in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it seems that we all have to have like that point that tips us over the edge. And why I do somewhat that, one of the reasons why I do this podcast is to help people to not get to that point, right? So that we're not, ending up at the point where we push ourselves over the edge, because I truly believe that a lot of this, in terms of what happens with the body, whether it's the gut, whether it's the adrenals, whether it's even down to the point of eating disorders, a lot of it starts up here and it comes from up here. Now, I would love to hear from you a little bit, because you've got some courses, right? And you talk about mindset as it relates to your health and to getting you out of this cycle of beating yourself up. You have this body image audit course. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but it's up to you in terms of things. But what I'm getting at is I want folks to understand how much the mind has to do with your overall health, and how much you're beating yourself up is actually affecting your gut. So would you tell us a little bit about how body image and how you perceive yourself does relate to tearing your health down?
Yeah. So I'll tell you the reason that I got into doing this body image work, which will kind of answer the question, then we can go into it a little bit more, is so after grad school, I was, even after, recovery from the eating disorder and everything, I was still firmly in the food as medicine community, right? And I still believe in food as a very powerful healing tool, but it can't be the only thing that we use. And I think that's a big deficit that we as dietitians, as nutritionists, and both kinds of programs, whatever track that you take, it's a big deficit in the curriculum, because we're taught, okay, you have this health condition, like here are all of these supplements, here are all the healing nutrients, like here's basically the elimination diet that you should do. But it's gotten to the point where even functional medicine practitioners are handing out food elimination protocols like their medications. And if you don't assess the stress, if you don't assess all of the other things that are going on, if you don't assess the relationship with food and body image, you're actually going to make that stressor worse, contributing to worsening health outcomes over the long term. So what I was seeing was, as I was taking people fresh out of grad school, right? I was taking people through these different elimination protocols. Oh, you've got thyroid, let's do this. You've got, candida, let's do this. You've got SIBO, let's do this. But what I was seeing was, while the people's symptoms would improve when they were on the protocol, as soon as they were off, they were like, I can't, do I really have to be on this forever? And my answer now is, unless you have celiac disease or an anaphylactic allergy, you probably don't have to remove something forever, period, right? You may not feel great if you eat something most of the time, but can you eat it sometimes and be okay? Probably. There are obviously exceptions to that, but as a general, recommendation. But so what I was seeing was, a lot of these people were so focused on weight as a marker of health, and they would only allow themselves to have what people call, like food freedom now, if their body was at a certain size. So I call that conditional food freedom, basically. This was conditional food freedom based on your body size, because so many people have been conditioned to believe, we really all have, that the only way that you can be healthy is if you're within a certain BMI, or if you're a certain body type, if you only have a certain percentage of body fat or whatever. And I was finding that we could get people healthy in the sense that their blood markers were better, their stool tests were better, their hormone tests were better, but they were still so damn stressed out about their body image that their body wasn't fully letting them heal, because now that was the main chronic stressor. Right. So what I figured out was, and this is kind of when I changed the trajectory of my business, I was like, okay, well, now what we're going to do is we're going to start to work on your mindset. We're going to start to work on your relationship with food and your body. And we're going to work on the clinical piece at the same time. Because what I find is, if you don't work on those in conjunction, you can't actually heal either thing. You can't heal the chronic symptoms or the chronic illness or the autoimmune disease. You can't heal the relationship with food, because there are issues on both sides, right? If you only try to heal the relationship with food, and you go into what the anti-diet community would just say, like, eat all the things, like nutrition doesn't matter. And I'm just like, what? This is a whole nother conversation. But if you just go you have unconditional permission to eat all things, which, like, yes, you do. But if you don't also take into account, okay, well, if I have autoimmune thyroid disease, for example, if I eat certain foods, I'm going to flare up my health condition. And that doesn't feel like freedom to me. That actually just feels like pain, right? So informing people how to work on their relationship with food and their body, and at the same time bringing more neutrality around nutrition, so it's not morally based and it's not healthism based. It's not, you have to do this forever, all or nothing, or you're never going to get well, because that messes up their body image and relationship with food too. Because if people believe they can never get to health unless they're in a certain body size, they can never get to health unless they're following an elimination diet forever, then they start to believe that it's their fault if they mess up. So combining those two together, I find, is so incredibly important, because you'll see people all over the place that, they think, or maybe it looks like they're eating the healthiest diet and they work out all the time. And then behind the scenes, like what maybe a lot of people don't see, but what we see as practitioners, because we see them in our practices, is out from the outside, it looks like this person is perfectly healthy. Maybe they have a fit body, or, maybe it looks like they're eating really healthy foods and whatever. And then they come to us and they're like, I have no period. I'm stressed out of the wazoo. I have all of these gut issues. My stress is incredibly high. And it's like, okay, well, you're not actually healthy, Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of re-education with my patients around how nutrition can be neutral. At the same time, we can be intentional with our nutrition without being all or nothing, and how body image and your relationship with food is an integral part to healing, even if that's not what you would think is your main issue, right? Even if you've got gut issues, even if you got all this other stuff. And again, it all comes back to stress, because we've talked about how stress messes up the HPA axis, messes up your gut brain axis, messes up all of the things, creates oodles of inflammation everywhere. What if that stress is coming from you hating the way your body looks every single day? And we don't think about this a lot as a potential root cause. But when you think about, if you're going through your day and you're not comfortable in your body, there are hundreds of times during the day that are these little moments that you're just like, ooh, that doesn't feel good. Like, ooh, I should do something about that. And if you're there, even if you remove every other stressor, that's still a massive stressor. And again, stress is what is contributing to all this disease and these symptoms.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. It's the root. I mean, it's the root at everything. And I'll often ask people like, hey, how much stress do you have? And people will be like, no, my life's great. Everything's great. But then once you start to ask about the body image and the mindset and all that, there's that key. And so definitely, guys, those of you who are listening to the podcast right now, this is what I'm getting at. You got to take a look inside, because maybe your life is great and there isn't anything outward that's a problem. But what are you saying to yourself day in, day out? What is your subconscious saying to you? Because and this is something that it's a lifelong battle, because I'm sure that Dana would agree with me that you will find yourself, saying weird things. You're like, oh God, I'm trying to break that. And so, and just out of nowhere, right? It'll come out of nowhere. And for me, like even today, I had pizza last night because I'm at home visiting my dad, and in the northern Illinois, Wisconsin area, we have some amazing pizza places. And so I was like, this is when I have my pizza. I'm going for it, right? This morning I felt like a little puffy because, well, I usually don't eat that much cheese. Actually, I don't eat cheese usually ever. And I don't usually eat those kind of things. And it's not because I avoid the cheese because it's making me fat or anything. It's like, I really do have lactose intolerance. So it does bother me. But today I felt a little puffy and I'm like, oh, my puffiness is over my jeans. I got to work on that. And it's like that mind, it just comes out of nowhere. You've programmed yourself. So I'm guessing that Dana, you too have those little things that come out of nowhere. And you're like, oh, we're working on this brain.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's the thing too, is again, a big part of what I do is helping people get out of the all or nothing mentality in all things, right? So one of the reasons why diets fail so spectacularly is because they don't set you up with, okay, well, what happens if this comes up? What happens if we're not living in a perfectly curated world for you to be able to follow this extreme protocol, right? And then again, people feel like a failure. So one of the things that I do with people, and I like to remind everybody who listens to my podcast and everything, is like, this stuff is still going to come up because we live in a world that is run by appearance equals value, right? We live in a world like the US diet and fitness culture industry is something like $72 billion annually. annually, right? So there's no way that you're not going to run into this stuff. But the difference is when you're working on this, you start to cultivate resilience, right? So you can bounce back easier from those kinds of things. So the way that you know that you might be making progress in something like this is, let's say before you had a day where maybe you like went on vacation. Haha, what are those like in COVID? Like you had a day where, you didn't eat foods that you normally did, and now you might feel bloated, or maybe you're having some digestive stuff or whatever. And in the past, you would be like, okay, gotta reset tomorrow, like gotta go back to my go-to elimination protocol, do a juice cleanse, whatever it is. And then you went through with that, right? So it was cause and effect kind of action. Now, once you're making progress, the difference is you can have pizza one night and feel really bloated the next day, and you have that thought and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel good. But then you don't act on that impulse because you know it's actually not going to move the health needle forward, right? Like doing these resets over and over again is not actually healthy. It's just ingraining you in this on again, off again, like roller coaster that we have in our relationship with food. And in the long term, that can lead to things like weight cycling. It can lead to things that weight cycling can lead to, which is higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, higher incidence of diabetes, like things that are not health outcomes, right? If we're truly going for health, seesawing between binge eating and restricting is not healthy, right? Finding more of a middle ground, which is going to be more sustainable for the long term, actually has better research for health promoting long-term outcomes than doing these short-term extreme protocols. So thinking about like, yes, these thoughts are still going to come up. You're not a failure because the thoughts are coming up. If you think about if you're making a new path through the woods, right? To use like a hiking reference. If there's the easy path there, that's the path that you've done 100 million times because you've grown up in diet culture and you're like, oh, I had a bad day. Okay, here's the path for diet and exercise. We always go this way. If you're trying to create a new mindset, you have to make a new path. And that's hard, right? You got to get a machete in there. Like you got to break down all these old toxic beliefs that you have. You got to weed out all of these as much as possible. The triggers that are in your life that are making things worse and keeping you stuck in that mindset, knowing that there's still going to be like a big ass oak tree. Sorry if I'm not allowed to curse on your podcast, right? There's going to be a big tree or something huge obstacle that's in your way, but now you learn how to go around it. You don't come up to the tree and you're like, oh, I'm just going to turn back. Like, this is it. You learn how to go around it, or maybe you trip over it and you fall, but then you're like, I'm going to get back up again. So cultivating that resilience is also super, super, super important so that you can keep going forward, because there's no like failing in any of this, right? Unlike some of these diet protocols that are like, if they're, 40 days long, they're like, oh, day 20, you had some pizza. Sorry, go back to square one. Do not collect $200. Do not pass go, which is very toxic and keeps you stuck in this, I'm either all in or all out. And then what happens is when you're not doing the protocol, you're eating all of the things that the protocol has told you you're not allowed to have, because that's a famine restriction response. But of course you feel really bad when you're eating all of those things, because what happens to most people is they're no longer eating the health promoting foods that make them feel really good, but they feel like diet foods for them. So like, I'm not doing a diet, I'm not eating those foods. But now we've cut out all the fruits and vegetables and proteins and grains and all of the things that have all of the nutrients that fuel your cells to make you feel good, right? So we're not saying like, just go eat pizza and donuts and cake and candies every day, because you're gonna feel like crap if you do that. What we're saying is remove the morality with those foods and bring more neutrality to all foods so that you can truly listen to the internal cues of what your body is going to tell you actually feels good, which for most of the time is going to be nutrient dense, health promoting foods, but you can still allow other things like, having a cocktail or having some wine or having some birthday cake or, pie on whatever your main holiday is that you celebrate, like God forbid. But then you just go back to normal the next day. You don't have to go back to a reset the next day, because again, we're back on this hamster wheel of the yo-yo diet cycle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, this is huge stuff, I think, for folks to be reinforced with, because I think as a naturopathic doctor, I mean, I fully fully admit that I have likely screwed up a lot of people, myself included, because of looking at things more in the diet culture, more in all of the stuff, the baggage that I brought to the situation. Now it's obviously much different, but it's something to really focus on when you're thinking about the overall trajectory of where you're going. You're getting better every day. And it's not about, oh crap, I had pizza last night. Because literally what I would do normally, folks, just so you can hear how things were for my world, just like Dana was saying, reset. Literally today, I would not eat all day so that my gut could process everything and then it would be fine the next day. And what did I find out? Well, when I don't eat the whole day, then the next day I eat like double because my brain's like, oh, I fasted yesterday, so I can eat double. And so it would create this crazy like mentality. And I'd probably eat double, if not triple the next day. And then I'd also be like, at the end of the day, when I realized how much I ate, I'd be like, oh my God, I need to run like 10 miles because if I run 10 miles, that's however many calories. I mean, it's sick, right? But that's kind of where the mind goes. And I think a lot of people who are listening to this probably can resonate with some of that backstory there in terms of how this kind of plays out in our minds. Now, one of the things that you have on your website that I love is your recipes and beautiful pictures on
Thank
there.
you.
Yeah, I was like, wow, look at this food porn. I'm like, wow, I'm getting hungry looking at this. I mean,
Non-diet food porn. Woo!
Yeah, it's like, and the thing that you mentioned is something about taste bud explosions, or something like that on your website. And I think for a lot of people who are considering diet culture and thinking about that, there is that concept of food has to taste bland. It has to be boring. It has to be like, and what I equate it to, and you made a reference to spinach and chicken on your website. And for anyone who's listening to this and ever participated in a figure competition or any type of weightlifting competition where you have to cut weight or boxing or any of that, you're getting down to boiled chicken and steamed broccoli, and it's repeat over and over again. And really, this is what I envision diet food to be like. That's in my head. So a lot of people think about like, that's what healthy food is, because diet equals healthy. And that's like the big thing, of course, that the two of us are trying to do here is like, diet does not equal healthy, not the same thing. Healthy food can be delicious. Now, tell us a little bit about your recipes, how you come up with your recipes. Like what's your thought process on that? Because I like to hear about how people make their delicious treats at home.
Yeah. So the reason I started before I was even a practitioner, I was a food blogger while I was in grad school because I was like, I love nutrition, but I can't start seeing patients yet. So what am I going to be doing? Let's make a food blog, because I was like, when I start seeing patients, I want to have a resource that I can send them to that I have vetted the recipes. I know they are good, because I love referring out to other people's recipes if I've tried them. But many times I'd be like, ooh, that looks really good. Send it to a patient. They were like, Dana, this was trash. Like, why did you send me this? I was like, ooh, don't want that to ever happen again. So I got started with food blogging because after I got diagnosed with celiac disease, I didn't know how to cook at all. So, I mean, I had been living in a college dorm. I had been, growing up with my parents. My mom and dad cooked all the time. Like I knew how to make pasta and cereal and eggs, and that was pretty much it. Right. And so I also grew up not eating a lot of vegetables. I was and by a lot, I mean, the only vegetables I ate were carrots with ranch dressing and corn. That was basically it. Right. So I didn't know how to make vegetables. I didn't know how to make really anything. So I was like, I got to teach myself to cook because I am not going to be eating plain chicken and broccoli all the time. Because when you first get diagnosed with celiac disease, and I think it's a lot easier now, there's a lot more resources. But back then, man, the gluten-free products were cardboard. They were disgusting. So I was like, okay, well, I got to figure out how to make food taste good, because I come from an Italian family. And so we eat food that has a lot of flavor in it. And I was like, how do I do this after going through a grieving period of like, oh my God, I could never eat pasta and bagels and bread again. Like my whole family's from New York. So that was like my whole life growing up. Right. So after going through that grieving period, I was like, fine, I'm going to learn how to make things taste good. So at first, it was just kind of like learning the ropes of like what flavors go together and how to actually cook things. And then pre-COVID times, whenever I would go to restaurants or whenever I would travel, I would see flavor combinations that I liked, or I would see a, ingredient, or I would see a dish on a menu and be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go home and try and make that gluten-free, or I'm going to try and replicate that. Because if I had this in, Sedona, Arizona, which is one of my favorite places in the world, I can't just, pop on a cross-country flight to go get those margaritas and whatever that delicious Mexican food was, and then come home and just there we go, cross-country trip in 2 days. That's not going to happen every time I have a craving for that. So I started replicating things I was having in restaurants. Before, paleo and everything was even a thing, I loved cookbooks. Growing up, I had a scrapbook of all of these recipes that I had printed out online. And this was before I was gluten-free. So I was like, okay, well, let me try and go through these things and try and make them gluten-free. And what I figured out is I'm a horrible gluten-free baker for the most part. So I just almost always, I've been getting better at it, but I'll almost always follow somebody else's recipes for baking. I've been working on it a lot, so it has been getting better, but man, it's a struggle. So I'm more of a savory cook than a baker. But so I learned how to combine ingredients. I would try and replicate things, and then sometimes it'll just be like, what kind of sounds good? And then it'll just kind of come. And my parents would always make fun of me because when I used to live at their house before I moved downtown DC, after college, whenever I would make something for dinner, I would put 6 sauces on the table, and they'd be like, Dana, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I just thought this would go with this, and this would go with this, and this would go with this. So I would combine weird things and figure out what worked and what didn't work. So it's a really weird, I don't want to call myself a genius, but it's a really weird creative mind that I just kind of have a Rolodex of recipes, ideas in my head. And whenever I would see something, I would put a note on my phone, then put a note in Google Docs and put a note on this piece of paper. So I have probably 7 different places where I have a document of recipes to make. So anytime I'm feeling uninspired by the food that I'm eating, which is very common in COVID, right? We're all doing the same thing every day. So one of the places that I've found that is fun to kind of find that creativity is the kitchen again. So mixing up flavors.
Nice. No, I think that's important because a lot of times when I have folks who are really working to try to start eating healthy and getting better every day in terms of their relationship with their body and their food, it is important to have things that taste good, that feel indulgent, that really do nourish the soul, because sadly, healthy food does have a bad rap. Like I said, it doesn't have that allure. And so how to make foods taste indulgent and how to make foods really keep you in that mindset of I'm eating healthy, but it's good for me and it tastes good and I feel good when I eat these things. And so I love it when there's recipes on websites so that folks can, and when they're time tested and you've actually, I think the biggest thing is you've actually tested them, because that's the biggest thing too. Yeah. I've given some recommendations over the years. I was like, well, that looks good, but I hadn't tried it. And then, that always backfires. You always test it.
One thing I realized too is, and I forgot to mention this, is ever since I got diagnosed with celiac disease, so almost 10 years ago at this point, I've had a horrible sense of smell. People have really freaked out about this during COVID. They're like, you can't smell? I'm like, I always can't smell. I have a very minimal sense of smell, which, connected to your taste buds, right? Which then I didn't realize until probably the last couple of years. I put so many more spices on my food than you'll typically see on a lot of different food blogs. And that was one of the things I realized as I was cooking out of these healthy cookbooks and whatever. And they were just so bland to me. And my family would be like, what do you mean this tastes good? I'm like, I can barely taste anything. So I would let me add a little bit of this, add a little bit of this. And so usually the amount of spices that I'm using, AKA flavor, is a lot more than at least what I had seen on a lot of other places. So my lack of a sense of smell has helped everyone else eat more tasty food.
I love it. Oh, my husband loved that. He is all about that. He doesn't say he has a lack of smell or taste, but I'm wondering because he's always dumping more on there. So I will introduce him to your recipes as well.
Thanks.
Maybe a game changer there. So, of course, we've talked about body image. We've talked about health. We've talked about all kinds of different things. I would love for you to share with folks a little bit about your podcast, because I was on your podcast just the last week it came out. And so very fun, informative topics as far as what I've seen all on there. So give folks a little bit of background on your podcast. And then, of course, tell us where we can find you and how they could tune in and all of those things.
Yeah. So my podcast is currently called Real Talk with Dana. It's going to be getting a makeover in April, though. So we're going to be changing the name, and I'm getting one of my business partners is going to be joining me but for right now, it's Real Talk with Dana. But so mostly what I do on there is I bring on people that I would just selfishly love to have conversations with about certain topics, right? All within the health and nutrition, fitness, mindset space, all within the philosophy or lens of how can we heal from chronic health conditions or just be in general healthy people without an all or nothing mentality, right? So like morality and dogma free nutrition. So bringing more neutrality to food, bringing more body acceptance to the forefront of the conversation, and also going really in depth on certain topics. So what I've been doing this year which has been super fun for me, is organizing the episodes and interviews that are coming out by topic by month. So in January, I did non-diet nutrition, period, basically because in January, the peak of diet culture, everybody's elimination diet this and elimination diet that. And I was like, here's how you can work on your health without elimination diets. So February has been the nervous system and adrenal fatigue and burnout. And that is where Janine's episode was. In March, we're going to be talking about gut health. And I have plans for all of the rest of the year. So that's been really fun to do topic stuff, because I find and I'm sure you experience this too, is sometimes when we have guests that do topics that are very diverse, it's not a very like continuous flow. Like one day we might be talking about meditation and mindset, and the next week we're talking about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And like both of those are connected, but not directly, at least if you're binge listening to episodes, which I tend to do with podcasts. So that's my show. I've had it for about a little over 3 years now, which has been really fun. And then my website is Real Food with Dana, which is where you can find all my recipes, all the podcasts, find out how to work with me if you're not already working with Janine, And then I also have these courses that we kind of mentioned before that are mostly working on your body image and relationship with food as a precursor or in conjunction to working on more of the clinical issues that we have been talking about today. And those are all at wholeheartedeating.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Dana, for sharing so many things with us and telling us all about your podcast, which is awesome, by the way, guys. It's a lot of great, like, no BS information, and I highly recommend going over and checking out Dana's podcast, because it just gives, it's a deeper look into what we can do to take care of ourselves, which I always am going to be wholeheartedly supporting, because I think that the more information, the better. We really, everyone could use more information to help themselves to take care of themselves. So with all that being said, Dana, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to chatting with you more in the future, because I think we have a lot of other topics that we could bring to the mix here. So
definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been really fun.
Hey, health junkies, I hope you enjoyed my podcast. If you want to continue the conversation based on what topic I'm talking about at any given time on the Health Fix podcast, head over to my Facebook group, Find Your Health Fix. It's where we are talking about what's going on in health, what I'm talking about in the podcast, and I love to answer questions there. So come hang out and join the conversation. And by the way, right now I have a free Manage Your Stress Naturally course that you can grab on my website at drjkrausend.com, because so many people are stressed out right now, and really it has to do with the basics, your routines and simple habits that are messing you up. So head on over to drjkrausend.com and go check out my free course on managing stress naturally. All right, folks, have a great day, whatever you're doing.
Subscribe, rate, and share info.